Hi, everyone. Hold on to your hats and get yourself cozy because today's episode is shocking. I have 3 stories that are sure to remind you to keep your eyes and ears open and looking over your shoulder. Not paying attention is not an option. So get ready to batten down the hatches, but first, please capture that subscribe button. Great. Now let's get into the stories. Northwestern Ohio, 2012. It was the summer of 2012, and I was camping with my twin brother Mike in the woods near Lake Erie, just west of Sandusky, Ohio. We did all the usual camping things like fishing, hiking, and canoeing. Basically, every day was full, and we went to bed early and woke up at dawn every day. One night, I had fallen asleep early, and I woke up at around 3 because I had to take a leak. I didn't feel like waking up my brother, even though Mom and Dad always made us promise to use the buddy system, even at our age. I thought that was stupid, so I didn't bother. Also, I basically didn't feel like it because I knew my brother would just whine and complain, and I would spend more time trying to wake him up than it would take to just run to the bathroom and back. Anyway, the moon was almost full that night, so it gave off plenty of light for me to see everything outside the tent. Also, there weren't many bushes in the area around our site, so I didn't have to worry or be afraid of something hiding and waiting to sneak up on me. Watching too many scary movies can do that to you. As I was walking towards the bathroom, well, I should honestly say running because it was creepy out there alone, my heart suddenly skipped a beat when I saw something that scared the crap out of me. Not far from the path were 2 dog-like creatures, just standing there, staring at me. I blinked to be sure I was really seeing what I was seeing and not still asleep, and that's when they took a step towards me. I completely freaked out, and I started running back to the tent, all the while listening to what sounded like they were chasing after me and making the strangest noises. And the weird thing is that the noises weren't so much a dog or wolf sound, but more of something like a human. It was the scariest sound ever, and it gave me goosebumps. These creatures were gaining on me, at least that's what it felt like from the sound of it, but I was too afraid to turn around. I thought that at any second they would pounce on me and attack, but that never happened. But when I finally did make it back to the tent, my heart was beating so fast and loud that Mike woke up and asked what was going on. I told him what had just happened. He laughed, told me to shut up. "Dude," I told him, "if you don't believe me, go out there yourself and see." He laughed again and said, "Sure thing, I have to go anyway." So I sat there and I watched Mike stand up and head out of the tent. Even though he was totally irritating, I knew that this was serious. I couldn't let him go out there by himself. I followed him out of the tent and into the darkness. My eyes took a few seconds to adjust, but I could see him standing about 15 yards away, staring off at the trees. I walked over next to him and I looked in that direction too. Nothing seemed amiss on the surface except for the fact that we were staring into pitch black forest. But then as my eyes adjusted, I could see something in the shadows. It was a dog. No, it was part dog, part man. It didn't move or growl, it just stood there frozen. The dog part of it looked like any dog you would see in the neighborhood, but with yellow eyes and a dog-like head. The human part was just the upper half, like it stopped at its waist, other than the fact that it was standing there on 2 legs like a man. To say that I was scared at that moment would be an understatement. I whispered to Mike and asked what he thought it was. He said he didn't know, but we needed to get back to the tent ASAP. I was about to say okay when the creature let out this horrific howl. The sound of the thing echoing through the trees was like nothing I had ever heard before. I think Mike and I had our hearts in our throats because we just couldn't say a word. And we didn't even wait 1 second. We just ran back to the tent and threw the flap open. We were both terrified. Mike was shaking, and I felt like throwing up. I asked him what we should do now, and he said that he didn't know. But whatever we needed to do, it would have to be done fast. Because if this thing got in our tent, it would kill us for sure. At that same moment, we heard a dog howl in the distance, and we started to feel relieved until it was answered by another howl, closer to us, like right outside the tent. It had followed us, and there was another one that it was talking to, off in the distance. This thing wasn't wasting any time. Before we knew it, it had started digging under the tent flap. At first I thought this was impossible. Then all of a sudden there were claws on our tent floor. Mike and I were both screaming hysterically at this point, but then it stopped, and there was nothing but silence. We waited inside the tent, not being able to see anything, just waiting for some sort of noise that would tell us what was going on. I'd say about 10 minutes passed without a sound, so we decided to risk it and peek outside the tent. The thing was nowhere to be found, but there were what looked like dog tracks everywhere around the tent, circling it, and then leading off into the woods. We couldn't see the prints too far off in the darkness, but we could see far enough that we felt safe that the coast was clear to dash to the car, which was about 100 yards away. It took us less than 10 seconds to get there, it felt like. But when we looked back, we could see that we were now being chased. 3 of them were now coming out of the woods, headed straight for us. They were just like the one we had seen at the campsite, but these looked to be about 3 times bigger, with darker fur. Mike flung open the car door as fast as he could, but when he turned back to me, I was gone. I had tripped over something, trying to get away. They were right on our heels, and they chased after us in a full-out sprint. I scrambled back up and I got to the car just in time, with Mike screaming in my ears to hurry to get inside. Before opening the door, I looked back just in time to see one of them running at me with its canine teeth bared, red eyes. And then the creature stopped on a dime, right in front of my face, with its breath reeking of death. But then, it just disappeared. I think it disappeared. Later, Mike would say that it had turned and ran off so quickly that it was almost like it vaporized. Mike was so intent on getting out of there that the car started moving before I was fully inside, and he almost drove off without me because I nearly fell out while trying to pull my door shut. We escaped the forest that night, but it still gives us nightmares to this day to think of what might have happened if we hadn't gotten back to that tent, but mostly back to the car. I don't know who or what those dog men are or where they came from, but I just want everybody who lives out in those woods to be aware that there are creatures there in northern Ohio, and you need to be careful. Now, I've been researching ever since our incident, and I really believe that they came down from Michigan, since we're pretty close to the state line. I read that some people think they originated there, or that there are large groups there. Either way, it's too close for comfort for me. This encounter takes place just north of Las Vegas, Nevada, in Echo Canyon State Park. The 4 people involved all live in Henderson, which is a suburb of Las Vegas. The 4 people include Jessica and 3 of her friends who had all been planning a camping trip for weeks. The plan was to head up north to Echo Canyon State Park and spend a few nights away. They were all excited to spend time in nature, away from the hustle and bustle of everyday life. Jessica was busy. She worked long hours at her job at the Hawthorne Suites Hotel, often working the night shift and being so tired in the day that she didn't have much time for anything else. When she did have free time, she liked to spend it with her friends and family and being outdoors such as this. So she was especially looking forward to the trip. She had read about Echo Canyon but had never been before, and it seemed like a perfect spot. But now, as they were getting closer and closer to the destination, Jessica started to have this weird sense of unease. She wasn't sure why, but something about it just didn't seem right. It was definitely a strange reaction. Echo Canyon is a beautiful place. The canyon walls tower above you and the river is crystal clear. There are plenty of places to explore, and the group had plans to spend hours hiking and swimming. They were even hoping to find the hidden waterfall that one of them had read about. But as soon as they arrived at the campsite, Jessica's unease turned into outright fear. There was something about the place that just felt off to her. She couldn't explain it, and she knew it was going to be hard for her to stay there. The group began to set up camp, but Jessica just couldn't shake the feeling. She tried to push it out of her mind, but she couldn't help but feel they were being watched. And then that night, Jessica's fear only grew. She could see the shadows lengthening and stretching across the campground, and she felt like something was stalking them. She knew she was being ridiculous, but she couldn't help it. She was sure that something was out there waiting to attack them. She then asks her friends if they all want to go back to the tents. She figured that if she could just get to sleep, maybe she could wake up in the morning and everything would be over. But everyone else was talking and having a good time, and they weren't ready to end the night just yet. The other truth is that Jessica was deathly afraid of the dark. She hadn't told her friends this, but ever since she was a child, she had been terrified of the night. She even sometimes had nightmares about creatures coming to get her in the darkness. Even still, she decided to brave the darkness and go to her tent by herself. For whatever reason, the mindless chatter wasn't her thing. At first, all seemed okay as she was walking back to the tent, but before long, she was convinced that she saw something moving in the darkness. She squinted, but couldn't quite make out what it was, and she wasn't even sure if it was anything, maybe just shadows playing with her mind. The movement and the shadows moved closer, but still nothing that she could make out. And then after stopping and squinting into the trees a few times, a creature revealed itself, breaking out of the shadows right in front of her. And now she can see that this creature is unlike anything she has ever seen before. It's standing on two legs, and it is taller than her. It has a long body with fur all over it. She's terrified. She can't even get her mind to think or her mouth to yell for her friends. She said it looked like a cross between a human and an animal, covered in fur, eyes glowing red, and it had long, sharp claws hanging down at its sides. And then the creature opened its mouth, and Jessica could see that it had long, sharp teeth. All of it was too much. She panicked, but at the same time was unable to react at all due to her fear. So she stood there. The creature purposely was moving closer to her, and not before long, she could feel its hot breath on her skin. She tries to scream, but she can't. So without thinking, she tries to run back to her friends, but trips and falls to the ground. And now the creature is standing over her with its claws up and curled, ready to strike. Jessica knows for sure. She feels she's about to die. And then suddenly she hears a voice. The creature hears it too and stops moving towards her. The noise breaks the silence again, and the creature runs off into the darkness. Jessica doesn't know what to do, how to react, so she stays where she is, lying on the ground, scared and holding her head in her hands. Within seconds, she hears footsteps coming towards her, and she hopes that it's her friends. But she's too scared to lift her head and focus in the direction of the footsteps. Instead, she just cowers into herself even more, her head down, sobbing. And then she feels someone touching her, and she slowly opens her eyes to see her friend Sarah standing over her. Sarah's saying something, but Jessica can barely make it out. All she can do is watch Sarah's mouth moving. Sarah helps Jessica get herself up and leads her back to the campsite. Jessica is shaken mentally, and her body won't stop shivering. But otherwise, she's unharmed and has no physical damage. Sarah ultimately mustered the strength to describe the creature to her friends, saying that it was like a cross between a human and an animal, telling them it was taller than anybody she knew and covered in fur, with the red eyes and the sharp claws and teeth. She knew the story seemed absurd as she said the words out loud, but the look on her face had her friends horrified, and so they unanimously decided to pack everything up and leave. Even though it was basically the middle of the night, nobody wanted to stay any longer. They were all freaked out. Nobody wanted to be in the dark alone. And so they leave, quickly packing up their things and getting everything into the car. They don't even bother packing up in an organized fashion. They just throw the gear and the tents into the car and take off. They drive all the way home without much discussion, wanting to put as much distance between them and the creature as possible, while they all think about what happened. In the end, none of them ever goes back to Echo Canyon State Park again. They're all too scared of what or who they might see. I wasn't always a believer in the paranormal, but my family and I unknowingly moved into a haunted house. The experiences I had there changed my perspective forever. It's easy to say that there's no such thing as ghosts because it's nearly impossible to prove it, but once you experience it directly, there is no denying it. Not only did I feel the presence of a ghost, but I also felt threatened and violated by it. I always thought people were making up stories when they talked about their experiences, but now I'm passionate about the paranormal. There's no way I could tell you everything that happened in that house, but there are a few things that I feel compelled to share with you. Spirits are not to be antagonized and messed with. We need to treat them with respect. We need to learn how to live amongst them instead of denying their existence. When we first moved into the house, we all thought it was perfect. It was big enough that all the kids had their own bedroom. The kitchen was enormous and the views were spectacular. It was right by the harbor in Massachusetts, and you could see hundreds of boats of all types traveling through. There were beautiful ocean views as far as you could see, and I'll never forget the smell of seawater that you got when you cracked the window open. It seemed too good to be true at first. My room was massive, and it had the most intricate carvings in the wood all around the room. I had never seen anything so beautiful. The first week we stayed there, we didn't have beds or anything, but I didn't care. I was just so happy to finally have my own room. Slowly but surely, we started to move furniture in, and it started to feel like home. One night, my brother and I were roughhouse playing, and we knocked a mirror off the wall. It shattered all over the floor. My mom made us go to our rooms for an hour just to calm us down, but it wasn't long before I could hear my brother running up and down the hallway. I just knew my mom was going to freak out at both of us, and I was probably going to be the one to get in trouble for his behavior. I timed it so that his footsteps were right outside my door, and I swung my door open to smack into him. I looked out into the hallway. There wasn't anybody there. Convinced that my brother must have run into his own room, I ran to his door and swung it open. I found him fast asleep in bed, and then I heard the footsteps again, and when I looked, there was nobody there. I remember my hair stood on end and it freaked me out so badly. I went back to my room and tried to sleep, but barely did. Later that night, I was startled awake, but I didn't know by what. So I started to sit up in bed and I squinted into the darkness only to see this dark figure leaning over me. I tried to scream, but I couldn't make a sound. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't move, and it felt like hands were on my chest holding me down. I tried as hard as possible to make a sound, but I could only shake in the bed. Finally, I was released. I screamed for my parents. They ran in to check on me and told me that I was just having a bad dream. I told them it wasn't a dream, and that a dark figure was forcing me to stay on the bed. They told me there was no such thing as ghosts or spirits. They assured me that it was just a bad dream and encouraged me to get back to sleep. I was awake the whole night, staring at the foot of the bed. And then a few days later, I heard my mom and dad fighting over who was leaving the tub running. They both claimed to not use the tub, they only used the shower. So this became a common argument, and soon, every member of the family was getting blamed for leaving the tub running. My dad even got so mad one night that he shut the water off to the tub completely. A couple of minutes afterwards, we were all in the bathroom arguing about who the guilty one was, when the faucet turned on completely by itself. My mom asked, "Who's there?" And the lights in the bathroom turned off. We screamed. We ran. A little while after that, it was my birthday. We were celebrating with cake. My mom told me to make a wish and then blow out the candles. I made the wish, took a deep breath, but before I could blow them out, all the candles on the cake went out, and a pair of candles from the mantelpiece lit up. We all just sat there looking at the candles until my dad grabbed them and threw them into the garbage. We then just ate the cake and tried to pretend nothing had happened. Many years later, we looked the house up, and it turned out that a man who lived there previously had killed his wife, and then himself. It had made the local newspaper. One day, I'd love to compile a list of all my family's experiences there, as well as the experiences of anybody else who lived there and had the same experiences. It was crazy, and being in a place like that will turn anybody into a believer.